My daughter looked me in the eye and said, "We're not expecting you for Christmas this year. It's just going to be his side of the family." I felt the sting, but decades of sacrifice had taught me to hold my head high. That night, I quietly reviewed every financial thread tying me to her life and began pulling them one by one. She thought she was ending something, but she had no idea the story was only beginning. Before I continue the story, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from. The cold air bit at my cheeks as I stepped out of my car, clutching the tin of homemade cranberry bread I had baked the night before. Celine's house looked like something out of a holiday magazine. White icicle lights draped perfectly along the eaves, a giant inflatable snowman waving from the yard, and the scent of cinnamon drifting from somewhere inside. I'd helped pay for half of this place, yet lately, it felt less and less like I belonged here. I rang the doorbell and waited. Celine opened it with a smile so polished it made my stomach tighten. Her arms didn't reach for me, just gestured me in. Cody appeared briefly in the hallway, giving me a quick nod before disappearing into another room. Something in her stance, shoulders squared, chin slightly lifted, made me feel like I was stepping into an interview, not my daughter's home. "Everything looks beautiful," I said, glancing at the twinkling garland. "Thanks, Mom," she replied. "We've been busy getting ready for the holidays." Her tone was smooth, practiced, like she'd rehearsed it. We sat at the kitchen island. The smell of cloves and roasted chestnuts filled the air. I waited for the usual warm chatter about gift lists and Christmas dinner plans, but the conversation drifted oddly, touching on weather and her in-laws' ski trip. My hands rested on the counter, waiting. Then she glanced at Cody, who'd reappeared in the doorway. He gave a slight nod. She took a breath. "Mom, we're not expecting you for Christmas this year. It's just going to be his side of the family." The words landed like ice water. For a moment, I didn't understand. I blinked, my mind rifling through memories of Christmas mornings here, the ones I cooked, cleaned, and paid for. Cody avoided my eyes, fiddling with his watch. "I see," I said slowly, though I didn't. My mind jumped to the year I hosted 20 people and bought every last ornament on the tree. I'd thought those sacrifices meant something. Celine leaned forward, voice soft but firm. "It's just different traditions, and the space is limited. You understand, right?" I glanced at the glossy holiday centerpiece on the table, a crystal bowl of imported ornaments I recognized from the receipt in my purse weeks ago. I'd paid for it. Cody cleared his throat but said nothing. The air felt heavy with things unsaid. I pressed my lips together, tasting the metallic tang of my own restraint. "Well," I said, standing, "I don't want to keep you from your traditions." I walked to the front door, passing the evergreen wreath I'd bought last year. It hung there proudly, as though nothing had changed, but everything had. Back in my car, I sat for a long moment watching the snowflakes melt against the windshield. My chest ached, but beneath the ache, something else stirred. A sharper edge, a quiet resolve. At home, I set the cranberry bread on my kitchen counter untouched. I pulled out a stack of unopened bank statements, the ones I'd been meaning to go through. My eyes stopped at one line, the monthly mortgage payment for Celine's house. My hand hovered over it, and a slow, deliberate breath left my chest. They might not expect me for Christmas, but they had no idea what else not to expect. The morning light filtered through the lace curtains in my kitchen, casting a soft, golden haze over the table where my planner lay open. I sipped my coffee, flipping through the pages to see what December had in store. The squares for the week of Christmas were conspicuously empty, except for my usual grocery run and a church luncheon. No notes from Celine, no tentative dinner plans, no hint of the holiday traditions we'd shared for decades. I told myself she was busy. Real estate could be relentless this time of year. Still, something about the blankness in that week gnawed at me. I had always been the one to initiate, hosting, decorating, cooking. I closed the planner, trying not to let the silence feel so loud. By late morning, I decided to call her. My thumb hovered over her name before pressing the button. It rang twice, then went to voicemail. I left a cheerful message asking about Christmas and whether she'd decided on a menu. An hour later, my phone buzzed with a text. "We'll see, Mom." I stared at the screen. No emoji, no follow-up question, just 4 words that felt like a shrug. I set the phone down, my coffee now cold. That's when I noticed the bank statement still sitting unopened on the counter. Flipping it open, I scanned the transactions and stopped. A withdrawal I didn't recognize, linked to the mortgage account I'd been paying for them. I told myself it could be a simple error. Still, the unease that had been flickering all morning began to take shape, like frost patterns spreading across a window. The following day, I received a phone call, not from Celine but from her husband's sister, inviting me to brunch. "We'd love to see you," she said warmly. "It'll be at Celine and Cody's place, Sunday at 11. I arrived on time, carrying a tin of homemade cinnamon rolls. The dining room was buzzing with chatter, holiday music playing in the background. Celine moved between the kitchen and the table, avoiding my eyes longer than politeness allowed. Midway through the meal, Cody, in his usual affable tone, said, "Oh, we figured you'd have your own thing going on for Christmas, right?" The clink of silverware on plates paused for a second, just enough for me to feel the heat in my face. I managed to smile. "We'll see," I said, echoing Celine's words back to him. They moved on quickly, chatting about ski trips and New Year's plans. I kept my voice pleasant, even when my mind replayed his remark over and over. That night, back home, I sat by the window with the tree lights casting a warm glow in the dark room. I thought of past Christmas mornings, Celine unwrapping gifts in her robe, the smell of cinnamon and coffee, the way we used to laugh together. Those memories felt like they belonged to another lifetime. Patterns were forming, ones I couldn't ignore. The short text, the unreturned call, the remark at brunch, and the mortgage withdrawal that didn't add up. I didn't need to confront them yet. Not until I had every piece of the puzzle. I poured myself another cup of coffee, opened my laptop, and began pulling up my online banking records. I knew I needed to see the whole picture before I made my next move. The late afternoon light spilled into my living room, bathing everything in a muted gold. The lace curtains swayed gently as if stirred by a secret draft, and I sat in my armchair with a box of old Christmas cards on my lap. I had told myself I would sort through them, maybe throw some away, but I knew I was really looking for something I couldn't name. The cards were a mixture of glossy store-bought greetings and handmade ones from when Celine was little. Finger-painted snowmen, glittery stars pasted on red paper. My fingertips lingered on the edges of each, tracing the handwriting, the ink fading with time. Some made me smile, but most filled me with an ache I kept pressed down. I set a few aside, their images of perfect families smiling in matching sweaters reminding me too much of what had quietly slipped away. Near the bottom of the stack, I found it, a family photo from years ago. Everyone was there. Celine, Cody, the in-laws, even the neighbors. I remembered the day, the smell of cinnamon rolls, the faint hum of Christmas music. But in this printed version, I wasn't in the frame at all. My place at the far end of the couch had been cropped out, the photo centered on Celine and Cody instead. I could see it in my mind like it was yesterday. The moment Celine had called everyone to gather for the picture, her tone warm but pointed. "Let's get one of the family right here." I'd stepped forward, thinking I was included, but she'd waved slightly, motioning for me to move aside so she could make space. I had laughed it off at the time, the way you do when you're trying not to make things awkward. Seeing it again, I felt the sting deep in my chest. That memory unraveled more than I expected. I was back in the kitchen that day, refilling the cider, when I overheard Celine talking to one of Cody's cousins. "Mom doesn't need to be involved in everything," she'd said, her voice pitched low, but not low enough. The words had slid under my skin like a splinter. I'd swallowed it then, told myself I was imagining malice. But now, the words from the brunch last week, Cody's offhand remark about me having my own thing going on, echoed against that memory like they'd been rehearsed for years. It wasn't a new wound, it was an old one reopening. I glanced at the desk where the unopened mortgage notice still lay, its white envelope glaring under the lamplight. 5 years ago, Celine had quietly taken over paying the water bill without telling me. It seemed small at the time, a gesture she framed as taking something off my plate. Now I wondered if that had been the first step. Small changes, unspoken decisions, until I was removed from the bigger ones entirely. And here we were again, but this time it wasn't the water bill. It was the roof over their heads, the payment I'd been making for years. My money moved around without my knowledge, and not a word said to me about it. I leaned back in the chair, my fingers tightening on the photo. This wasn't just about Christmas. It wasn't even about the mortgage. It was a pattern, subtle, deliberate, and dangerous in its familiarity. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of it settle over me. I wouldn't confront her yet, not now. I would gather my proof, financial and otherwise. I'd keep my silence until I had enough to make it count. This time, I wouldn't just let the pattern pass unnoticed. The text from Celine came in just after 9, crisp and deliberate. Meet me at the Willow Street Cafe at 11. Need to talk about the holidays. No, hi Mom, no warm greeting. Just straight to business. I stared at the words on my phone, letting the steam from my coffee curl around my face. The tone wasn't an invitation, it was a summons. I could already feel the weight of what wasn't being said. At 10:45, I parked in front of the cafe, the winter air nipping at my cheeks. I stepped inside and scanned the room before choosing a corner table with a clear view of the entrance. If this was going to be a conversation about family plans, I wanted to see her coming. I wrapped my hands around my mug, steadying myself as I waited. Celine swept in at 11:03, coat unbuttoned, hair perfectly set, a faint cloud of expensive perfume preceding her. She slid into the chair opposite mine without a smile, immediately launching into chatter about how busy they'd been. Renovations, Cody's business, hosting his family. I let her words roll over me, searching for the opening she'd eventually give me. I tried to shift the conversation. Celine, I think we need to talk about making sure the holidays work for everyone. She cut me off with a practiced smile. Mom, you worry too much. We've got everything handled. Her voice was light, but the control in it was unmistakable. I took a slow breath, grounding myself. Handled is fine, I said evenly, but I won't be sidelined from my own family. Her smile froze just a fraction. This isn't about sidelining you. Then let's be clear, I continued, my voice steady but firm. Financial and emotional boundaries have to be respected. I've been there for every need, every request, and I deserve the same consideration. It was the first time I'd drawn the line out loud. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips, but I didn't waver. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing just enough for me to notice. Then, with a light laugh, she said, loud enough for the couple at the next table to hear, Mom just doesn't understand how things work now. A flicker of a smirk played on her lips as she sipped her latte, the sound of the other table's awkward silence filling the space between us. I felt the heat rise in my face, not from shame, but from recognition. This was deliberate. I didn't give her the satisfaction of a reaction. I hope you remember this moment, I said quietly, each word measured. I stood, leaving my coffee half finished, and walked out into the cold air. My back was straight, my steps deliberate. If she thought she could push me out, she was going to learn just how steady I could stand my ground. I sat at my desk that evening, the phone lying face up in front of me like a challenge I didn't want to take. The calendar reminder I'd set for family planning call flashed on the screen. It wasn't planning, it was staging. A carefully orchestrated session where Celine got to pull the strings, and I was expected to nod along. I rubbed the edge of my notebook with my thumb, the paper soft from weeks of being thumbed through while I scribbled thoughts and tallies of payments I'd made on their behalf. The phone buzzed. I drew in a slow breath and tapped join. Hi, everyone. Celine's voice came through first, bright and controlled, like she was hosting a meeting. A chorus of hellos followed from other relatives, my sister-in-law in Austin, a cousin in Tulsa. "Mom, you're here," Celine said, almost like a check mark on her list, not a greeting. "I'm here," I replied evenly, already bracing for the undercurrent I knew was coming. Celine wasted no time easing into what she clearly thought was her domain. "So, about Christmas this year." She outlined the dinner plans, the gift exchange, even who would sit where, as though this was some corporate event with assigned seating. "I know we've all got our own things going on," she continued, "so if it works out that Mom can come, great, but no pressure." No pressure. The phrase rolled over me like cold water. "Celine," I said, my tone steady, "we should talk about what Christmas means in this family. It's not just another gathering, it's tradition. It's ours." There was a pause. "Of course, Mom," she said, breezy and dismissive, before moving on to dessert assignments. I stayed quiet, but my fingers curled slightly around the pen in my hand. When the discussion circled back to me, I didn't soften my words. "If I'm not welcome as a mother, then don't expect me to keep carrying the weight behind the scenes," I said. My voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. The silence that followed was the loudest sound of the night. I imagined the shifting eyes on the other end, the awkward glances exchanged over phone screens. My sister-in-law murmured, "Well," but didn't finish. Celine cleared her throat. "Noted," she said. The word clipped. It wasn't agreement. It was containment. I didn't give her the satisfaction of filling the pause with more explanation. I had said what needed saying, and then she did it. "We all know Mom gets dramatic when she doesn't get her way." Celine laughed lightly, the sound sugar-coated but with a bitter core. A few relatives chuckled, though it sounded forced. I could almost see their uncomfortable smiles, the way they'd lean back to avoid choosing sides. It was a clean hit, public, polished, and wrapped in a joke. She knew exactly what she was doing. The sting burned, but it didn't knock me off balance. "I'm glad you think this is funny," I said quietly, my tone even. "I'll remember that." She tried to keep the conversation going after that, as if nothing had happened, but I had already decided how this would end. I glanced at the clock, picked up my pen, and calmly said, "I'll leave you all to it. Good night." And just like that, I hung up. The phone screen went dark, leaving my reflection faint in the glass. I set it face down on the desk and sat for a moment, the quiet in my house wrapping around me like armor. She thought ending my involvement would be as simple as a laugh and a shrug. She had no idea how patient I could be when it came to winning the long game. That morning, I sat in my home office with a cup of coffee cooling beside me. The light from the blinds cut thin stripes across my desk, and my laptop hummed softly. I logged into my bank account, expecting to check the usual, utilities, grocery receipts, the small monthly donations I made to the local food bank. Instead, a number popped up that didn't belong. A large payment, nearly 4 figures, labeled under travel accommodations. My stomach tightened. I clicked for details, my fingers slowing with each keystroke. The money had come from the joint emergency fund I'd opened years ago for genuine crises. Medical needs, home repairs, not for spa resorts and ocean view suites. My daughter's name sat neatly under authorized by. I stared at it, the cursor blinking like it was mocking me. I reached for the phone and called the bank, my tone measured even though my pulse thudded in my ears. The representative, a woman named Julia, confirmed my suspicion. Celine had used her secondary signatory rights to make the payment. "This isn't the first time, Mrs. Carson," Julia said gently. "There were a few smaller withdrawals in the past year." I gripped the receiver tighter. Smaller withdrawals? I thought back, trying to match those amounts to any conversation we'd had. There had been none. Celine hadn't asked, hadn't even hinted. She'd simply taken. My voice didn't shake when I thanked Julia for her time, but my hand was ice cold when I set the phone down. 15 minutes later, I was dressed in my best navy coat and driving to the bank. The December air bit at my cheeks as I walked in, but inside I was warm, too warm, with the rush of decision. I asked for the branch manager. We sat in his office, and I signed the forms to freeze the joint account immediately. From now on, all transactions will require my in-person approval, I instructed. The pen scratched across the paper with a satisfying finality. For the first time in weeks, I felt the balance tip back toward me, even if only slightly. I left the bank with a folder of printed statements tucked under my arm like a shield. By the time I got home, my phone was already ringing. Celine's voice burst through before I could even say hello. My card just got declined while I was checking out in front of everyone. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was? I let her words hang there, her indignation filling the silence. Yes, I said evenly. I do. You crossed the line, Celine. I'm just drawing it clearly for you now. She sputtered, her tone sharp and incredulous. It was just for the trip. Cody's family invited us. Then Cody's family can pay for it, I replied, and ended the call before she could recover. The house was quiet again. I made myself a cup of tea, the steam curling upward as if nothing in the world had shifted. But it had. I placed the bank statements on my desk, aligning the edges neatly. I would keep them close, along with every record and receipt. This wasn't a one-time slip. This was a pattern, and patterns could be proven. I took a slow sip, letting the quiet wrap around me. Somewhere I knew Celine was pacing, fuming, trying to figure out her next move. Let her. I had all the time in the world. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about the kind of respect she thought she could buy with it. The invitation came wrapped in a tone too sweet to trust. Celine's voice on the phone was light, almost sing-song. Mom, Cody and I thought it'd be nice to have dinner together, clear the air before Christmas. There'll be a few relatives there, just so everyone's on the same page. I didn't need to ask what on the same page meant. It was her polite way of saying, we're going to stage something and you're the target. Still, I accepted. There are times when you walk into the lion's den, not to be eaten, but to remind the lion you've got teeth too. The restaurant was one of those upscale Dallas spots where every glass gleamed and the servers spoke in soft, rehearsed tones. I arrived 5 minutes early, taking my seat at the far end of a long table. I wanted a clear view of every face. Celine and Cody came in together, all smiles and hugs for the others. When they reached me, Celine's smile thinned. Mom, you look well-rested, she said, her eyes scanning me as if she were appraising a used car. As the appetizers were served, she began her little performance. You know, she said brightly to the table, Mom's been forgetting the smallest things lately. I told her last week about our Christmas plans, and she acted like she'd never heard a word. Laughter rippled from a few seats down. Cody leaned in. We just want to make sure you're comfortable, you know. Maybe it's time to let someone else handle the serious stuff, like your finances. The words were soft, but the knife's edge was sharp. They weren't just planting doubt. They were trying to make it grow in public. I let the silence stretch. Let them think they'd drawn blood. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out a crisp, cream-colored envelope. Speaking of finances, I said, my voice calm, I brought something. I slid the envelope across the table toward Celine. She hesitated before opening it, her hands suddenly less steady. Inside were notarized documents, updated just last week, confirming my full and sole control over my assets, with no co-signers, no shared access, and no legal means for anyone else to touch them. The language was ironclad. I had them reviewed by my attorney, I added, watching Cody's smirk falter. So there's no confusion. The table went still. A cousin on Celine's side coughed into her napkin. Someone else shifted uncomfortably in their seat. Celine tried to laugh it off, but her voice cracked. Well, this isn't necessary, Mom. We were just talking about making life easier for you. And I'm making sure it stays easy, I said, gathering my napkin and standing. I didn't wait for dessert. I left them there, with the envelope lying between the half-eaten breadsticks and the untouched wine glasses. As I walked out, I caught the faint sound of whispered questions rising like steam from the table. Back home, I made tea and opened a fresh journal. I began writing, not just what happened tonight, but every detail from the first sign of trouble. Dates, words, expressions, everything that might matter later. If they thought tonight was the end of it, they were wrong. Tonight was the proof that I could take a hit, walk away smiling, and still win the point. If they wanted a war, they'd just learned I don't show up without my armor. The December evening air outside was cool and still, but inside my house, the atmosphere was charged. I'd spent the day preparing for this, carefully placing chairs in a semicircle around the fireplace, the largest armchair positioned where I could see everyone's face. The coffee table held nothing but a glass of water and a small black device hidden in plain sight. I'd invited everyone who mattered, those who had supported me and those who had worked against me. Tonight, there would be no misunderstandings. When the doorbell rang, I moved slowly, deliberately, letting them wait a moment before I opened it. Celine walked in first, all polished smiles and perfect hair, with Cody trailing behind her, checking his phone. A few of the others followed, their expressions ranging from polite curiosity to thinly veiled annoyance. I gestured for them to take their seats, and the room fell into a hush that made even the ticking of the old mantel clock sound loud. Celine wasted no time. "Mom," she began, her tone dripping with practiced sweetness. "We're all here because we need to address the division you've been creating. This isn't how families should work." Cody nodded along, glancing at the others for backup. A few relatives mumbled in agreement, while others shifted in their chairs, eyes fixed on the floor. I let her talk, let the words pile up like snow in a storm. She spoke about my dramatic reactions, about how I misunderstood her intentions, and about how she just wanted peace. Peace, apparently, on her terms alone. My heart thudded, but my hands were steady on my lap. When she paused for breath, I leaned forward slightly. "Celine," I said, my voice calm but carrying enough weight to quiet the murmurs. "You think I called this meeting to defend myself. I didn't." She blinked, taken aback. Cody straightened, sensing the shift. I reached down, pressed a button on the small device, and a soft click filled the room. The first recording played, a conversation between Celine and Cody in their kitchen, their voices unmistakable. "She's too sentimental to notice," Celine's voice said, sharp and dismissive. "By the time she figures out we've shifted things, it'll be too late." Laughter followed. Cody's, "Once the mortgage is in our name, we can do what we want with the place. She won't fight us." "She never does." Gasps spread through the room like ripples in water. Someone muttered, "Oh my God." Another relative's face flushed with anger. I let the first recording end before pressing play again. This one was shorter but crueler. "She's just outdated," Celine's voice sneered. "Honestly, I'm embarrassed when she talks to people. It's like she's stuck in another decade." The silence afterward was deafening. Celine's face lost all its practiced glow, her lips tightening. Cody opened his mouth, but I raised my hand, a small gesture, but enough to stop him mid-word. "I didn't call you here for reconciliation," I said evenly. "I called you here to make things clear. I will not tolerate being manipulated, disrespected, or used. Not anymore." Whispers rose from the other seats. One of my sisters-in-law glared at Celine. An older cousin shook his head in disgust. The air was thick with shifting allegiances, the subtle crack of their control splintering apart. Celine's eyes darted from face to face, searching for support, but none came. Even those who had nodded along earlier avoided her gaze now. I stood, letting the weight of the moment hang. "This ends here. You've underestimated me for the last time." Without waiting for a response, I walked to the front door, opened it, and stood aside. "You can go now." Celine rose slowly, her cheeks flushed. Cody muttering something under his breath. They stepped past me, and I closed the door behind them with a solid, final click. For a moment, I just stood there, my hand resting on the doorframe, feeling the steady beat of my pulse. Then I turned the deadbolt. The room behind me was still full of relatives, but the war, my war, had just shifted completely in my favor. They had underestimated me for the last time, and now the war was truly theirs to lose. The morning after the family meeting, I walked into the community center for the holiday craft fair, the scent of cinnamon and pine greeting me at the door. I could feel eyes on me before I'd even made it to the raffle table. Some people looked away quickly, pretending to busy themselves with displays of quilted ornaments or jars of homemade jam. Others, faces I'd known for decades, gave me small, measured nods. Their expressions weren't pitying. They were something else, understanding maybe. Quiet solidarity. Word traveled fast in a town like ours, and I didn't need anyone to tell me that what had happened in my living room the night before was now public knowledge. I carried myself with deliberate calm, stopping to greet a few acquaintances, accepting a cup of hot cider from the ladies' auxiliary president. It was subtle, but I noticed. The people who used to hover near my daughter, who laughed at her every story, were giving her a wide berth. The balance had shifted. Halfway through the fair, I saw her across the room. Celine standing with a tight smile, holding a plate of cookies like a shield. She spotted me but didn't approach. Instead, she made her way to a table surrounded by mutual acquaintances, her voice carrying just enough for me to hear snippets about misunderstandings and things blown out of proportion. I pretended to browse a display of hand-knitted scarves, but my attention was fixed on the exchange. One of her staunchest supporters, a woman named Margie, who had once defended Celine in every PTA squabble, crossed her arms. "Celine," she said evenly. "After hearing that recording, I just can't stand by you anymore. That wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a choice you made." The words landed like a stone in still water. Celine's smile faltered, her cheeks flushing. A few people shifted uncomfortably, others simply drifted away, leaving her in a shrinking circle. I didn't intervene. This was hers to absorb. That evening, as I settled into my armchair with a cup of chamomile tea, the phone rang. The caller ID made me blink. My cousin Rebecca from Oklahoma. We'd never been close, but she'd always been cordial, never taking sides. "Auntie," she began. She'd always called me that, though we weren't technically aunt and niece. "I heard about what happened. I stayed out of it before because I didn't know the full picture. But now, I want you to know I'm on your side." I listened quietly as she explained she had experience with legal asset protection, that she could help make sure no one, not even family, could access my accounts or property without my say-so. Her voice carried no judgment, just resolve. When we hung up, I sat there for a moment, letting the relief sink in. It wasn't just about the legal help, it was the validation, the reminder that truth had a way of finding its witnesses. Later, I walked into my office and began pulling files from the cabinet. Bank statements, the deed to my house, my will, everything that mattered. I worked methodically, labeling envelopes, creating copies, locking them in a fireproof safe. My hands were steady, my mind clear. Celine had taken enough from me over the years, time, trust, the peace of holidays. She would never again hold my home or my security in her hands. But as I closed the safe and turned the key, a chill traced my spine. I knew my daughter well enough to understand that silence wasn't surrender. The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood. I stepped inside with my head high, the echo of my heels steady against the marble floor. The air was taut, the kind of silence that comes before a storm. My daughter was already seated at the defendant's table, her hair pulled back so tightly it looked painful. She didn't look at me, not once, as the clerk called the case. When the judge took his seat, the proceedings moved quickly. My attorney presented the ledger, bank statements, and notarized agreements showing my sole ownership of the disputed accounts and property. Across the room, my daughter's lawyer stumbled through objections, but the paper trail was undeniable. The judge's gavel landed with finality. Control over the assets in question is to remain solely with Mrs. Whitmore. All secondary authorizations are hereby revoked. I exhaled slowly, my hands folded neatly in my lap. No smile, no victory cheer. Just the steady calm of a door closing for good. By the time I walked out of the courthouse, the news had already started to spread. I could see it on the faces of people passing by, neighbors, acquaintances from church, even the owner of the florist shop who had once sent my daughter discounted bouquets. There was no mistaking the sidelong glances or the way conversations shifted when her name came up. Social media lit up that afternoon with thinly veiled posts about family greed and learning the hard way. The people who had rallied around her during the earlier conflict were now silent, or worse, openly condemning her behavior. It was justice, in a way, but it didn't feel like triumph. I couldn't take any pleasure in watching her reputation crumble, even if she had earned every ounce of the fallout. She was waiting for me outside, just past the courthouse steps. "You're proud of yourself?" she hissed, her voice sharp enough to cut. "You made me look like a fool in front of the whole town." I stopped, the sun glaring in my eyes as I looked at her. "I didn't do that," I said evenly. "Your choices did." Her face flushed crimson, but I didn't give her the satisfaction of a longer exchange. I turned and walked away, the sound of her heels clattering angrily behind me fading into the hum of the street. Back home, I made a cup of tea and took it out to the porch. The winter air was crisp, the late afternoon sun dipping low behind the trees. I thought about the years I had spent bending, accommodating, forgiving. The bridge between us had been smoldering for years. Today, it finally collapsed. Oddly enough, there was peace in that. My home was mine again, my finances secure, my name untarnished where it mattered most. I had weathered the storm. That evening, I opened the cedar chest at the foot of my bed and began to sort through photographs, letters, and documents. Some I kept for memory's sake. Others I shredded without hesitation. Property deeds, my will, and every financial statement were placed in a locked, fireproof box, the key slipping neatly into my coat pocket. I moved slowly, methodically, until there was nothing left to put away. I had tied off every loose end I could find. I thought for a moment that the storm had truly passed. But then I heard the crunch of tires on gravel outside, the low hum of an engine cutting off. A car door slammed, and I realized this wasn't over. The knock on my door came mid-morning, sharp and deliberate. Through the frosted glass, I saw her outline, shoulders slumped, a far cry from the confident posture she carried into every confrontation. Celine stood there in jeans and a plain sweater, no polished coat, no heavy makeup. She looked smaller somehow. I hesitated before opening the door. Every instinct told me to protect my peace, but curiosity and maybe a stubborn trace of maternal reflex made me turn the handle. "Hi, Mom," she said softly, eyes darting around as if the porch itself might be listening. I stepped aside. "Come in." She crossed the threshold, the air between us taut. We sat in the living room, the same space where I had once hosted her birthday parties, the same space where silence had grown like a shadow in recent years. "I wanted to apologize," she began, voice steady but lacking warmth, "for how things have been. For the misunderstandings." The word misunderstandings made my jaw tighten. It was an apology wrapped in tissue paper, just enough to look like a gift, but light enough to blow away in the slightest breeze. Then came the real reason. "People are talking, Mom. I think it would be best if we showed a united front. Maybe drop the legal stuff, just to cool things down." There it was. Self-preservation, dressed up as reconciliation. "You're not asking for peace," I said quietly. "You're asking for silence. My silence." Her gaze flickered, but she didn't deny it. 2 days later, she suggested we meet at a diner halfway between our homes. The place was bright with chrome fixtures and the smell of coffee and fried eggs. We slid into a booth across from each other, the vinyl seat cool under my hands. We started with safer topics, old family Christmases, her favorite childhood ornaments, the time her father burned the turkey and we ate pie first. For a moment, I almost forgot the distance between us, but it didn't last. When I brought up trust, her voice cooled. "It's in the past, Mom. Let's not dig it up." That was when I knew she didn't see the damage as something to heal, only something to bury, and I wasn't going to help her bury it. Back home that evening, I stood in the hallway looking at the framed photo of her on the side table. She was laughing in it, her arms around her kids, my grandkids. I took the frame in my hands, felt the smooth glass, the weight of it. Then I opened the drawer of my desk and placed it inside. Not discarded, but no longer on display. I locked the drawer. It was my way of saying, "I'm not erasing you, but you don't get to take up space in my home until you've earned it." The phone rang as I stood there, the screen lighting up with her name. I let it ring until it went silent, then slipped the phone into my pocket. This time I chose not to answer. The community center smelled faintly of coffee and cinnamon rolls, the kind they served at every charity breakfast. I hadn't attended in months, maybe years, but today felt different. As I walked in, I noticed heads turning, not with pity, not with judgment, but with something softer. Recognition, understanding. Mrs. Turner from down the street pressed my hand. "We've heard everything now," she said quietly. "I'm sorry for what you've gone through, and proud of how you've handled it." I smiled, a real one this time. Around the room, I caught nods from people I'd thought had long since taken sides against me. Turns out, the truth had its own legs. It had simply taken time to walk into the light. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen. Not as a victim, not as the difficult mother, but as myself. Later at home, I pulled a worn box from the top of my closet. Inside were old photographs, letters, and mementos from better years. I kept some memories worth holding on to. But at the bottom, I found a folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges. It was the letter I'd written months ago to Celine but never sent. The words were raw, pleas for understanding, promises to make things right. Reading them now, I realized I no longer needed her validation to feel whole. I took the letter to the fireplace, struck a match, and watched it burn. The paper curled inward, the ink disappearing into flame. It felt like unhooking a weight from around my neck. That evening, I took a walk through the park as the sun began its slow descent. The air was cool, the sky a wash of gold and rose. Near the pond, I ran into Claire, an old acquaintance from the library board. "I'm organizing a volunteer project," she said with a smile. "We could use someone like you." I surprised myself by saying yes. Back home, I stood in the yard with a small tree sapling in my hands, a young maple I'd bought that morning without quite knowing why. I dug the hole, set it in place, and pressed the soil down firmly around its roots. In my mind, I saw it decades from now, tall, strong, and shading a yard that might one day belong to someone else. It was a promise to the future, a quiet declaration that my story was still being written. And then I made another decision. I would travel, not just to escape, but to live. There was a small coastal town in Maine I'd always dreamed of visiting. I could already imagine the salt in the air, the sound of gulls overhead. That night, I sat by the window, the horizon outside darkening into twilight. I thought of everything that had happened, the wounds, the betrayals, the hard choices, and realized none of it had broken me. Pain had reshaped me, yes, but it had also made room for something stronger to grow. I couldn't control the choices of others. I could only choose for myself. "Sometimes the family you save," I whispered, "is yourself." As the sun dipped below the horizon, I whispered again, this time with a smile. "It's time." And for the first time in years, I truly meant it. Looking back, I've learned that protecting your peace is not selfish, it's survival. No one has the right to diminish your worth or control your life, no matter their title in your family. Sometimes the hardest choice is to walk away from those you love, but doing so may be the only way to save yourself. Your boundaries are not walls to keep love out, they are gates to let the right kind of love in. What about you? Have you ever had to stand your ground, even when it meant losing someone close? I'd love to hear your thoughts. If this story touched your heart, comment 1 or tell me where you're watching from. And if it didn't, share why. Your voice matters here. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next story that might speak to your own life.